What do you do when you've done all you can, and it's still not enough? When you've prayed the prayers, spoken the scriptures, tried to stay strong, but nothing seems to move? What do you do when the walls don't fall, the giant doesn't go down, and the storm won't stop raging? We've all been there, standing in the middle of life's chaos, swinging our swords at enemies we were never meant to fight. We tell ourselves, if I just try harder, if I just believe more, if I just fix it myself. But what if the greatest act of faith isn't in fighting, it's in letting go? What if the real victory begins when you stop striving and start surrendering? Because the truth is, not every battle is yours to fight. Some battles belong only to God. Life can feel like a battlefield. Every morning you wake up to another fight, for peace, for hope, for faith. You wear your armor, you swing your sword, and you push through the noise, trying to hold it all together. But some days, it feels like you're losing ground, like no matter how hard you try, the enemy keeps advancing. That's because some battles were never meant for your hands. They were meant for His. The same God who brought down Jericho's walls with a shout and parted the sea with a breath is still fighting for you today. You were never designed to win in your own strength. You were called to stand in His. And maybe the victory you've been waiting for won't come from fighting harder, but from stepping back and saying, Lord, this battle is yours. We all face battles, some visible, others buried deep inside. For some, it's the battle against fear that keeps you awake at night. For others, it's the battle of uncertainty, not knowing what tomorrow holds and wondering if you'll have enough strength to face it. There are battles in our homes, battles in our hearts, battles in our minds. You may not wear armor or carry a sword, but the fight feels real because it is. Every day you wake up, put on a brave face, and step onto a battlefield no one else can see. You fight to stay strong when everything around you is shaking. You fight to hold on to faith when the answers don't come. You fight to keep believing that somehow God still has a plan. And if you're honest, you're tired. Not just physically, but spiritually. You've been carrying the weight of the war on your shoulders for so long that surrender feels like failure. You've tried to fix it, solve it, pray it away, and power through it. But the harder you fight, the heavier it gets. You tell yourself you have to keep going, that if you stop fighting, everything will fall apart. So you tighten your grip. You try to control what's uncontrollable. You push, you strive, you exhaust every ounce of your strength. But what if the breakthrough doesn't come from fighting harder? What if it comes from finally letting go? Because sometimes the reason you feel overwhelmed isn't because you're weak. It's because you've been fighting battles that were never yours to begin with. God never called you to fight every fight. He called you to invite Him into the battle, to hand Him the sword and say, Lord, I can't do this without you. We often confuse control with faith. We think faith means doing everything in our power to make something happen. But true faith, the kind that moves mountains, begins when you realize that God's power works best when you stop pretending to be strong on your own. Maybe that's the lesson in your current storm. Maybe the fight you're in isn't about proving your strength. It's about discovering His. Maybe what feels like a battle is actually an invitation, a divine whisper saying, let me handle this one. It's easy to believe that God is in control when everything's peaceful. But what about when the storm rages? When the diagnosis comes? When the relationship ends? When the prayer you've prayed for years still hasn't been answered? That's where faith becomes real. Not when everything makes sense, but when nothing does, and you still choose to trust. Because here's the truth. God never loses a battle, not one. He's never been defeated, never been surprised, never been outnumbered. And the same God who parted the sea for Moses, who brought down the walls for Joshua, who silenced the lions for Daniel, is the same God who's fighting for you right now. You might not see it yet, but he's moving behind the scenes. The ground may feel shaky, but his promises haven't changed. He's not asking you to figure it out. He's asking you to trust him through it. When you invite God into your battle, you stop fighting for victory and start fighting from victory. The outcome isn't up to you. It's already been settled. The cross made sure of that. So if you're weary, if you're at the end of yourself, if you're ready to stop striving and start trusting, this is your moment. The moment you put down your sword and lift up your hands. The moment you stop trying to win in your strength and start letting God fight in his. Because the greatest power you'll ever experience doesn't come from fighting harder. It comes from surrendering sooner. The Bible is filled with moments where God reminds his people that the battle is never theirs. It's his. And yet, somehow, we keep trying to fight in our own strength. In Exodus 14:14, as the Israelites stood trapped between the Red Sea and the Egyptian army, panic filled the air. Behind them were chariots. Before them, waves. There was no escape. They cried out in fear, convinced they were about to die. But in that impossible moment, Moses spoke a truth that still echoes through time. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Be still? That doesn't sound like strategy, and it sounds like surrender. But that's exactly what faith looks like when everything falls apart. It's trusting that even when you can't move forward, God still can. It's believing that when your back is against the wall, he's not cornered. He's preparing to part the sea. God didn't need Israel's strength. He needed their stillness. Their calm obedience became the space for his power to be revealed. And the same is true for you. The moment you stop striving and start trusting, God begins to move in ways you never imagined. We see the same truth in 2 Chronicles 20:15, when King Jehoshaphat faced 3 enemy armies coming against Judah. Outnumbered, overwhelmed, and afraid, the king called the people to fast and pray. And in that sacred moment, God spoke through a prophet saying, "Do not be afraid or discouraged because of this vast army, for the battle is not yours but God's." What happened next was remarkable. Instead of sending soldiers first, Jehoshaphat sent worshippers. Instead of raising weapons, they raised praise. And as they began to sing, God confused their enemies. And Judah won a battle they never had to fight. That's the power of surrender. It invites heaven to take over. When your praise goes up, his power comes down. The sound of worship becomes the sound of victory. And then there's Psalm 46:10, "Be still and know that I am God." We love quoting it, but few understand its context. The psalmist wasn't talking about quiet mornings or peaceful moments. He wrote those words in the middle of chaos, when nations were raging and the earth was trembling. God was saying, even when the world shakes, I'm still in control. Stop striving. I've got this. To be still doesn't mean doing nothing. It means letting go of the illusion that you're the one holding it all together. It's releasing your grip and remembering who's really in command. Sometimes, God allows battles not to destroy you, but to show you who he is in the fight. He allows situations beyond your strength so you'll discover the depth of his. Because if you could handle every battle alone, you'd never know him as deliverer. It's easy to trust God as provider when everything's flowing, but trusting him as warrior, that's another level. That's when faith moves from theory to reality. That's when you stop praying, "God, help me fight," and start praying, "God, fight through me." And here's what's powerful. In every story of victory, the people of God did one thing first. They invited him in. They acknowledged his authority before they ever saw his activity. They made space for his presence before they asked for his power. Maybe that's what God is asking of you right now. Not to do more, but to surrender more. Not to fight harder, but to trust deeper. Because when you invite God into the battle, you shift the weight of the war off your shoulders and into His hands. When you're surrounded by pressure, remember, you're not the only one standing on the battlefield. The same God who fought for Moses, for Jehoshaphat, for David, fights for you. You might not see the walls falling yet. You might not see the sea parting or the enemy retreating. But heaven is already at work. God doesn't need time. He needs trust. The real question isn't, can God fight for me? The real question is, will I let Him? Because the moment you stop fighting for control and start standing in confidence, you'll see what Moses saw, seas parting, enemies falling, and God proving once again that no battle is too great for the one who reigns over it all. When you look through Scripture, a pattern emerges. Every person who truly knew victory had to first learn surrender. They all reached a breaking point, a place where human strength ran out and divine strength took over. Because the greatest battles in the Bible were never won by force, strategy, or numbers, they were won by faith, by stillness, by the power of a God who never loses. Let's start with Moses and the Red Sea, one of the most breathtaking moments in human history. Picture it. The Israelites stand at the edge of the sea, trapped between impossible odds, the roar of waves ahead, the thunder of Pharaoh's chariots behind. Mothers clutch their children, men grip their staffs, hearts pounding with fear. Every escape route is gone. Panic rises like the tide. They turn on Moses. Why did you bring us here to die? And in that chaos, God speaks through Moses with a command that defies logic. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Oh, stand still. When death is racing toward you, when the ground trembles with the sound of horses and iron wheels. Yes, because stillness is not surrender to fear. It's surrender to faith. It's the moment you stop reacting and start relying. Moses stretches out his hand and the sea begins to move. Walls of water rise up on both sides, a highway forming through the impossible. The same sea that looked like their end becomes their escape. The same waves that threatened to drown them swallow their enemies instead. That's what happens when God fights for you. He doesn't just deliver you from the enemy. He uses the enemy's own weapons to secure your victory. When you stop running, when you stop panicking, when you stand in the place of trust, He parts the waters. Now let's move to Jehoshaphat's battle in 2 Chronicles 20, one of the clearest pictures of how worship becomes warfare. Jehoshaphat is facing an army he can't outfight. 3 kingdoms have joined forces against him. The numbers are staggering. The people of Judah are terrified. But instead of rallying troops, the king gathers the nation to pray. He stands before the temple and says, "We have no power to face this vast army that is attacking us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you." That's one of the most powerful prayers in all of Scripture, because it's honest, it's humble, it's human, and God responds. He tells them, "Do not be afraid or discouraged because of this vast army. The battle is not yours, but God's." The next morning, Jehoshaphat does something unthinkable. He sends singers ahead of the soldiers. No swords, no shields, just voices raised in worship. And as they begin to praise, something supernatural happens. The enemy armies turn on each other. Confusion breaks out in the camp. By the time Judah arrives, the battlefield is silent, every enemy defeated, not by might, but by melody. When you let God fight your battles, sometimes the sound of your praise does more than the strength of your plans. Worship shifts the atmosphere. It tells both heaven and hell that your confidence isn't in circumstances. It's in the God who commands them. The people of Judah didn't just win that day. They walked away with plunder they didn't fight for. God didn't only give them victory, He gave them abundance. Because when you surrender the battle, God doesn't just win it, He multiplies it. Then there's David and Goliath, a story we know by heart, yet one we rarely see for what it truly is. Not a story about human courage, but divine confidence. David was young, overlooked, and untrained in war. The king had armor. The soldiers had swords, but none of them had what David carried: the presence of God. When he faced Goliath, he wasn't armed with strength, he was armed with faith. The giant towered over him, mocking, intimidating, certain of his victory. And David, with nothing but a sling and 5 stones, stood there and declared, "You come against me with sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." That's not arrogance, that's authority. That's the voice of someone who knows that the outcome doesn't depend on him. And the moment that stone flew, heaven took over. One strike, one moment, one act of trust, and the mighty fell. But don't miss this. David didn't win because he fought harder. He won because he invited God into the fight. The difference between fear and faith wasn't in the size of the enemy. It was in the size of David's surrender. He didn't pray, "God, give me strength to fight." He lived, "God, this fight is yours." And then we come to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, the most sacred battle ever fought, not with weapons, but with will. It's night, the air is heavy, the disciples are sleeping, and the Son of God is on his knees, sweating drops of blood, facing the weight of all sin and suffering. The cross stands before him, a symbol of pain, betrayal, and death. Everything in his humanity wants to escape it. He prays, "Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me." And then, the words that changed eternity, "Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." That's surrender, the kind that unlocks heaven's power, the kind that changes history. In that moment, angels strengthened him. The plan of salvation moved forward, and what looked like defeat on Friday became victory on Sunday. Because God doesn't lose battles, he transforms them. He turns crucifixions into resurrections. He turns graves into gardens. He turns surrender into strength. Every one of these stories carries the same heartbeat. God fights differently than we do. Moses learned that standing still can move mountains. Jehoshaphat discovered that singing can scatter enemies. David proved that faith is stronger than fear. And Jesus showed us that surrender is the highest form of strength. They each reached a point where they had nothing left. And that's when heaven stepped in. That's when the impossible turned possible. That's when the God of angel armies showed up and made the impossible bow to his power. And maybe that's what he's waiting for in your story. Not your strategy, not your strength, just your surrender. Because the moment you say, "Lord, I can't fight this anymore," heaven begins to move. When you stop striving, he starts fighting. When you release control, he releases power. When you worship instead of worry, he works wonders. So if you're standing before your own Red Sea, or facing your own Goliath, or surrounded by your own army of problems, don't panic. Don't pick up your sword in fear. Lift your hands in faith. Because the battle was never yours. It never will be. It belongs to the one who is never lost, who never retreats, who never surrenders, the Lord your God, mighty in battle. And he's still fighting for you. So how do you let God fight your battles? How do you stop carrying what was never yours and start walking in the peace that comes from surrender? It begins with a decision, not to quit, but to release, not to give up, but to give over. The first step is to surrender control through prayer. Most of us pray as a last resort, but real warriors pray as a first response. Prayer is not begging God to notice you. It's inviting him into the details of your battle. It's saying, "Lord, I don't just want you to fix this. I want you to lead this." When you pray from surrender instead of fear, something shifts. You stop handing God your script and start giving him your heart. You stop trying to manipulate the outcome and start trusting the process. Prayer isn't about getting God on your timeline. It's about aligning yourself with his. The second step is to speak his promises instead of your fears. The enemy thrives on your silence. Fear grows in the absence of faith-filled words. Every time you open your mouth and declare God's truth, you push back the darkness that tries to surround your mind. That's why Jesus spoke the word in the wilderness. He wasn't fighting with logic. He was fighting with truth. When you speak the word of God over your situation, you remind your soul who's really in charge. You remind your fear who the commander is. When your thoughts say, "I'm not strong enough," speak Isaiah 41:10. "Do not fear, for I am with you." When your mind whispers, "It's over," speak Philippians 1:6. He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion. When life says, "You've lost," speak Romans 8:37. In all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Words shape worlds. You can't speak defeat and expect to walk in victory. Invite God into your battle by declaring what he's already promised. The third step is to worship in the waiting. It's easy to praise after the breakthrough, but powerful faith praises before it. Worship tells God, "I trust you, even when I can't trace you." It's the language of warriors who know that victory starts in the heart, long before it's seen with the eyes. Remember Jehoshaphat's army. They won because they praised. Remember Paul and Silas in the prison. They sang and the chains broke. Remember Jonah in the belly of the fish. He worshipped and God brought him out. Worship doesn't change God's position. It changes yours. It lifts you from fear to faith, from striving to surrender. When you sing in the storm starts to lose its power over you. The fourth step is to obey in the ordinary. Sometimes God fights our biggest battles in the smallest acts of obedience. The miracle doesn't always look like walls falling or seas parting. Sometimes it's just trusting him enough to take the next step. When Naaman dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, he didn't feel powerful. He felt ridiculous. But obedience turned muddy water into healing. When Peter cast his net after fishing all night, it made no sense. But that one act of faith pulled in a harvest he couldn't contain. Don't wait for perfect conditions to do what God told you to do. The breakthrough you're praying for might be waiting on the obedience you're postponing. The fifth step is to remember God's past faithfulness. The enemy wants you to forget, because if you forget what God has done, you'll doubt what he can do. But when you look back and see his fingerprints on your life, your faith rises again. Remember the Red Seas he's parted. Remember the prayers he's answered. Remember the nights he carried you when you thought you couldn't make it. Memory becomes a weapon in the hands of faith. When David faced Goliath, he remembered the lion and the bear, and that memory fueled his confidence. Sometimes the best way to face your future is to remember your past victories. The sixth step is to surround yourself with faith-filled people. You were never meant to fight alone. Isolation is the enemy's trap. Community is God's design. When you're too weak to pray, you need people who can pray for you. When your faith wavers, you need voices around you who will remind you that God is still faithful. Even Jesus didn't walk alone. If the Son of God needed a circle, so do you. And finally, the seventh step, the one we often resist the most, to rest in his sovereignty. Rest isn't laziness, it's trust in motion. It's saying, God, I've done what I can. Now I'll let you do what only you can. Rest is a weapon. It confuses the enemy. He expects you to panic, but when you rest, you declare, the battle's already won. When you rest, you're not ignoring the war. You're acknowledging the warrior. You're saying, my God is bigger than what's against me, stronger than what's attacking me, and faithful to finish what he started. So pray, speak, worship, obey, remember, surround, rest. Each one of these isn't an act of weakness, they're acts of warfare. Because the greatest warriors in the kingdom aren't the ones who fight the hardest, they're the ones who trust the deepest. There comes a moment in every believer's life when you reach the edge of yourself. You've prayed every prayer you know, you've quoted every verse you can remember, you've fought the good fight, but now you're out of strength. Your hands are trembling, your heart is tired, and your soul whispers, "I can't keep doing this." That's the sacred moment when heaven leans in. Because when you reach the end of you, you finally reach the beginning of God. You see, God never asked you to win every battle. He only asked you to trust the one who already did. The victory was sealed long before you started fighting. Calvary made sure of that. The cross was heaven's declaration that the fight is finished, the grave is conquered, and your story is already safe in his hands. So, if you're standing in the middle of chaos right now, don't mistake silence for absence. The same God who parted seas still parts situations. The same voice that calmed storms still speaks peace into panic. He hasn't lost control of the field. He's simply working beyond your line of sight. You may not feel it, but the armies of heaven are moving. The ground you're standing on is surrounded by angels, and every prayer you've ever whispered has been heard in the throne room of God. The war you see is not the full picture. There are reinforcements you cannot see. God doesn't panic when you do. He's not intimidated by the size of the giant, the sound of the thunder, or the strength of the enemy. He's never once lost a battle, and he's not about to start with yours. So if you're weary, breathe. You don't have to prove your worth in the war. You just have to stay in his presence. When you stop fighting for control, you make room for his power. When you stop shouting for answers, you begin to hear his whisper. Surrender doesn't mean defeat, it means deliverance. It means saying, "Lord, I've carried this long enough. I trust you now." And when you do, when you truly hand it over, something changes. You feel the pressure lift, you sense the peace settle. It's not that the battle disappears, but suddenly you're no longer fighting alone. That's what happened for Moses at the sea. That's what happened for David before the giant. That's what happened for Jesus in Gethsemane. Victory came the moment they surrendered. Maybe God hasn't removed your problem because he's using it to reveal his power. Maybe the mountain hasn't moved because he's using it to strengthen your faith. Maybe the battle hasn't ended because he's still writing a testimony that will one day free someone else. Every tear you've cried has purpose. Every delay has design. Every disappointment is shaping something you can't yet see. The same God who works in silence works in precision. And when he moves, he doesn't just rescue. You rise different. You walk away stronger, softer, surer. The scars become stories of his strength. The wounds become wells of wisdom. So lift your head, straighten your shoulders. This is not your defeat. This is your development. This is not your ending. This is your equipping. If you could see what heaven sees, you'd stop worrying and start worshiping. You'd realize that every battle you faced has been preparing you for the blessing that's coming. Maybe right now, it feels like everything's falling apart. But child of God, sometimes things have to fall apart so God can rebuild them his way. Sometimes he lets the storm rage so you'll discover he's the anchor that never moves. He's still the fourth man in the fire. He's still the shepherd in the valley. He's still the defender who goes before you and the comforter who walks beside you. So tonight, instead of trying to figure it out, whisper the prayer that wins wars. God, this battle is yours. I trust you with the outcome. Then stand back. Watch him do what only he can do. Because when God steps into the fight, the impossible bows, the enemy flees, and peace rushes in where fear once ruled. You'll realize that what you thought would destroy you was actually designed to deliver you. The same cross that looked like defeat became the doorway to resurrection. And that's the story he's still writing in you. So be still, let go. Rest in the promise of Exodus 14:14. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. The victory you've been waiting for isn't coming from your effort. It's flowing from His presence. You may be surrounded by enemies, but you're also surrounded by grace. You may feel outnumbered, but you're overshadowed by glory. You may think you're losing, but heaven is declaring, you're already won. So take a breath, warrior. The fight belongs to God, and He never loses. Your story isn't over. Your breakthrough is closer than you think. He's fighting for you. He's covering you. He's already gone before you. And when He's done, the world will see that the God who never fails still reigns undefeated.